And human beings move like this, and flashes of cameras and loud noises are literally 100 times more stimulating than the preferred culture and natural rhythm of the tarsier monkey. Now, violence and violation relate and correlate to attunement. Meaning, if you're stationary and I go like that, I'm operating at 100 times dissociated attunement relative to you, which is why it creates shock and trauma. All violation is a lack of attunement. Everything, as we've explored earlier, is in relationship with each other and itself. Everything is in relationship with everything else. And everything has its own rhythm, its own pace and its own rhythm. And what you learn in landscape design is that to build a visual relationship where it doesn't feel unpleasant and unsettling, you don't want to get more than about 1 to 5 as the gap. Now, what I mean by that is if you want a tree to look like it belongs next to a house, you would put a tree there that is either up to 5 times bigger than the house or up to 5 times smaller than the house. And if you want to feel a very comfortable relationship, it's in the 1 to 3 ratio. And if you want something to feel like this belongs here, you have 2 things of very similar size, or one's 10% more, one's 10% the other, and your eye looks at them and they say, yeah, that belongs together. There's a pleasing relationship. There's an aesthetic in that relationship. You try and relate a grain of sand to a 5,000 square foot mansion. It's like, I'm going to carefully put this sand right here. It's like, what? What does that do? You can't even barely see it. The house is dominating the landscape. Oh, but the sand is placed very carefully right here. No, I'm going to move it back here a little bit. No, you've got to put something in scale. What that means is in proportional relationship with the other object. So we start to experience violation and pain when there's more than a 500% gap. I'm weeping in bitterness and tears, and you're laughing as if this is a great thing. It's too big a gap. That's going to erupt into pain, and in an emotionally illiterate and relationally uneducated culture, that will erupt into violence. You take something that's the sacred stone of another culture, Mecca or something like that, and then you have other people parading through, making a big scene about how unimportant it is and doing everything possible to show that it is meaningless, and you will have violence. Because what you're looking at is the gap, the spatial gap, the emotional gap, the mental gap between this is the most sacred thing that I know, meaning I'd willingly die for it. That's what makes something sacred. You would sacrifice. It's a transcendent position. This is more important than me. It represents something bigger. And so I am in service to this. And you are not only in ignorance, not only wouldn't pay a goddamn cent to show some respect, you're actually spending time, money, and energy to be sacrilegious, to violate that which is sacred intentionally. I want to hurt you, so I'm going to spend time and money going to your holy site, marching around, saying everything that's going to upset you, because I want to hurt you. And it works. You have a car coming up behind another car 100 times faster, and it rear ends the car. It happens emotionally, it happens mentally, it happens physically. Violation of the principle of attunement in a cosmology in which everything is related to each other destroys. You go from first gear to fifth gear, and maybe you can barely pull it off. You have 100 gears in the car and go up to 1 million, you strip the gears. You don't accelerate, you grind the gears and ruin the car. It's violation. I couldn't make the gap from dissociative, boundaryless Missouri to meaningless chitter and chatter and busyness going nowhere. The gap from reflecting on the deepest feelings imaginable to the chit-chat of discussing whose sneakers were more interesting. It's like, really? This is the most interesting thing we can talk about? It's too big a gap. And one of the things that culture does well is it softens this clash. Meaning if you've got dreadlocks and are wearing a black hat and are riding a horse and buggy and don't have any electricity and da-da-da, and everyone around you is driving a horse and buggy and da-da-da-da-da, and you're in your little clique, your Mormon clique, or is it there's another one, isn't there, that they don't deal with modernizing anything. I forget their names. But you intersect a Ferrari with that scene or a ghetto blaster, and there's no attunement. And what culture does is it says we're all going to be attuned. Now, it may not make any sense. It may be patently absurd. But we're all going to attune to the same nonsense. Now, everyone, okay, when somebody says, "How are you doing?" you say, "Thank you very much, I'm fine." Does everyone understand that? Okay. So, how are you doing? "I'm fine, Mrs. Pritchard. Thank you for asking." Very good. Very good. That's our culture. But Mrs. Pritchard, I'm not fine. I feel really sad that my dog died. Wait a minute. That's not our culture. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what you would like to do. The thing to do here is to say, "Thank you very much, I'm fine." Why is that thing to do when that doesn't correlate to the meaning of the words? What's the point of the dictionary if we're actually going to rewrite the dictionary to say, "How are you doing?" means please lie to me and say this regardless of how you're doing. It doesn't say that in the dictionary. No. It doesn't say that in the dictionary, but it is the polite thing to do. Well, who decides what's polite, Mrs. Pritchard? Well, it's what we do here. We decide. Everyone agrees that's the polite thing to do. But Mrs. Pritchard, that's not what I want to do. I actually want to know how people are feeling. Now, can anyone explain to Dane why this is not the conversation we have in this classroom? But Mrs. Pritchard, doesn't what I want have anything to do with anything in my education? Now, can everyone... Now, we don't interrupt in the class. You can see how irritating and enraged my teachers would get at this, at actually wanting things to make sense. It's one of the reasons I withdrew into homeschooling, aside from the, insanity of what was being learned, was I don't want to be someone's enemy. And within a cultural norm, the goal is not to be intelligent. The goal is not to be optimal. The goal is not to be accurate. The goal is to regulate a relationship, to grease the flow of a status quo. It is not to communicate honestly or any other thing. Its goal is to make people feel comfortable because everyone is doing the same thing. And it does this very well, by the way. If for example, you look at the incest and sexual abuse statistics in America, and you are more likely to be sexually abused by a family member than a stranger, by a large margin. That's the statistics. So if you wanted to help children, you would go around saying, talk to strangers, spend time with other people, make sure you have allies outside of your family. Whatever you do, don't be alone with your mother and father because they're dangerous. Got that, kid? That's the statistic. But that doesn't make us feel very good about mothers and fathers in this country, does it? Mothers and fathers are not going to pay school tuition, etc., for their children to hear what shits they are. It's not going to work. So, okay, we just move that statistic aside for 1 minute, and let's all agree, don't talk to strangers. Strangers are horrible people. You never know with a stranger. Now repeat after me, don't talk to strangers. Why? Well, you never know. A stranger could do this, but couldn't they also do this and this and this? No, that's not what we're talking about here. Let's get on point. Let's all agree. You see, and the problem with attuning in this way, and it does create comfort. It creates a great deal of comfort. It's one of the reasons abuses happen. It's very comfortable. Everyone knows this. My parents are these wonderful people. They couldn't possibly mean me any harm. The problem is when you get a large mass of people all using myth, superstition, and pseudoscience to take a large mass of people in the exact wrong direction of where the data points. Jonathan Haidt is talking about this right now in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. How allergies grow when you do not expose anyone to peanuts, as opposed to when you start regularly exposing a child to peanuts from a young age 2 or 3 times a week. The number of people allergic are several 100% more if you protect someone 100%. And so allergens are steadily escalating within the United States as schools steadily forbid children to eat nuts, as just one example. That when you fail to expose people to an outer reality, it's very much like in a garden. You plant a tree, and if you stake it too tightly so that it can't move in the wind, it never has to develop a trunk that can withstand the native wind. Because it doesn't have the trunk, it doesn't need the roots. And so after thoroughly staking and making a tree rigid for 10 years, if you remove the stakes, it'll just blow over. And at some point, it will outgrow the stakes, unless you want to just keep having 30-foot stakes. You've got to allow something to develop muscle. But there's an attunement ratio. It's got to happen slowly. You can't just stakes and then no stakes. You're coddled, now get out of the house. That's a violation. Because there's a rhythm, there's a cycle at which that muscle has to be developed. Now, the issue that I have with school and observe in this pattern of chauvinism is several-fold. One, despite obvious symptoms, not a single teacher ever said something derogatory or critical about my parents. And they said many positive things about my parents. Now, my parents never said anything derogatory about themselves and were constantly puffing themselves up. And they rewarded the siblings for puffing them up as well. So most of my siblings would compete to say nice things about my parents. The problem was that as each child developed various symptoms of trauma, they were not responsible for any of that. The parents were. And the school, in the normal flow of capitalism and pleasing the client, never said a word about that. But the discipline and the shame and the punishment directed at the children for the symptoms of trauma were always transferred to the innate fault within the child. So I might have a special education or a tutor talk in front of me to my parents about my inability to concentrate. But they would never talk about my parents' inability to regulate their violence, thus making me feel constantly anxious if I was present in my body, or the fact that if you're dissociative, to avoid the next uncontrollable violence, you're not going to learn as well. In other words, I don't have a difficulty learning. My parents have a difficulty being safe, and the adults around me have a difficulty speaking the truth and standing up for that. And there's a collusion within the power structure to make the child believe it's all their fault. That collusion is fostered by the parents, it's fostered by the teachers, it's fostered when parents get together and collude. Oh, you're having trouble with your kids? Boy, are they little brats at this age. Ugh. Has nothing to do with us, has nothing to do with the culture. Yeah, sometimes you just got to beat the shit out of them to get them to learn. Oh, I know it's not a very new agey thing to say, but yes, I know. Mine are just as bad. Just as bad. Religion weighs in here too when you look at the framework of a child's exposure to divinity. My father read me the Old Testament when I was 5 years old, 6 years old. He seemed to enjoy playing God. And the Lord said, "Bring your son up to the mountainside and make him ready for the sacrifice. And prepare your son for slaughter. Raise the sword, and at the moment the righteous, God-fearing man was about to sacrifice his son. The Lord said, Lo, for I see you are willing to do what a sociopathic son of a bitch like me might want you to do, and you're the kind of guy I want in my gang. We need folks like you who are willing to kill their kids. You have proved yourself unto the Lord. So I will spare your son. But don't forget it, should there ever come a time when to uphold your Christian faith, you must murder your children in cold blood. It could be called upon you, and thus it will be so. It's like, goodness gracious. Well, obviously, any terrified 6-year-old with trauma who's been beaten by his father is going to enjoy playing God, playing the other side. It's just he's passing on the trauma, the terror, the loneliness, the shame to his children, using them to feel a little better. Well, there's only so much of this usury for entertainment, for lies, for beatings, for sadistic pleasure. There's only so much of this entertainment that a child can experience before, on their feminine core, they feel absolutely worthless. Now, this worthlessness is expressed in several ways. First of all, my feelings don't matter. Second of all, my truth doesn't matter. But coming back to this pattern of suicide, I want to look at the pattern that leads a child to want to die. And since I and 2 other of my siblings have experienced this, I'm going to suggest that it applies to a noticeable percentage of young people in our country who kill or want to kill themselves. My father learned, with 2 sociopathic parents with PTSD, that there were times they wanted to kill him. Now, how does a parent want to kill their child? What goes on in a parent that leads them wanting to kill their child? Well, here's one possible scenario. Let's say you're a man in a culture in which your value as a man, within a hierarchy of human needs that says you need to survive, you need to feel secure in that survival, you need to seek love and belonging. That's the 3rd need in Maslow's hierarchy. And they're interlinked, meaning if you're not loved and if you don't belong, on a deep biological level, you know you will not survive. Now, you can get around it in a culture that loves money. They may hate you, but as long as you've got something they love to dish out, they will love the money, and it'll be a surrogate. But at a deep biological level, as mammals, we know that if we're outside the circle of the tribe, we die. We're the one that the lion picks off out of the monkey trees, because it's the monkey pod, it's the family that warns each other, that protects each other, that distracts, that fights for, that the individual survives when it fits within the tribe, within the herd, within the flock. This is how it's worked for billions of years. Now, let's say you're a sexual abuse survivor and you're 8 years old. You have a truth in a culture that hates its own shadow, that hates its own helplessness, that hates its own incompetence. You have a truth that could get your father or your mother disowned from the flock, which means you're threatening their survival. You're threatening their love and belonging. You see, and if no one in the community, if everyone says, oh, that's one of those people we hate, well, this migrates out. We see it happening in universities today where there's certain people identified, maybe a Ben Shapiro, maybe a Jordan Peterson, who those are one of the bad people because they're not saying the things that we say. We in the radical left. We don't like those people. They're bad. They're hurting people. They've got to be thrown out of the flock. Get rid of them. They're racist. They're bigots. They're horrible people. Kill them. Kill them. A common reptilian instinct. Shut them down. Don't let them talk. Get them away. Ruin their careers. Look at the phenomena of Brett Weinstein in Evergreen College. A fabulous, popular teacher who wouldn't conform to the dogma that's sweeping our country right now. You have this very interesting dichotomy of people claiming harm, literally terrorizing, traumatizing. I mean, it's like you say something that is upsetting, and that's dangerous, so you're bad. So we're going to ruin your career. We're going to shame you. We're going to curse you. We're going to get you fired. We're going to shout over you because that's not violent. This is protecting. This is protecting us. You know, when we go in America to Iraq to find the weapons of mass destruction, we are the weapon of mass destruction. There are more than 1 million Iraqi children dead because of our weapon of mass destruction. There are several million Iraqis with PTSD because of our weapon of mass destruction. And the supposed weapons were never found. Guccifer on email, an unreliable criminal source, was ultimately all we had to go on to invade another country, pollute the environment, drop thousands of cluster bombs on an innocent population to fight the bad guy. And then when we finally caught Saddam Hussein, we had the Catholic Church and others, let's forgive him. I mean, it's fine that millions of Iraqis are killed and all that, but let's show our kind mercy to the symbol of the abuse of patriarchy, who in turn, if you look at Saddam's history, an abused child, constantly humiliated by his father, and not a single person stood up for him until he had power to terrorize other people. And all of this gets thrown back to us at our culture. We have a culture here where no one stood up to the high facilitators and their abuse cycle. Nor would they. Nor would there be an apology. And it's a question of how much politicking, law, and manipulation is necessary on my part, not so that people will respond to the grief of violation by a therapist to a client and patient, but to the fear of legal action or anything else. In other words, when you have a traumatized culture, you don't respond to the screaming child. You wait till the screaming child becomes the dictator. And then you don't respond to the dictator out of empathy or love either. You do it out of fear. And there's a steady migration in the Hitlers and the Milosevics, in the Trumps, and in the Husseins. There's a steady migration from tyrannized, neglected, and abused children into dictators whose number one priority, as with Richard Nixon, is to stay in power, because to lose power and ranking in a sociopathic culture is to become victim to the feelings of helplessness one has when one says, please help me here. And everyone else turns away because you don't help with the social ranking. Imagine the difference in a pattern where no one at Trump's senior organization would stand by and let Trump Jr. be humiliated, dominated, manipulated, and used. So that he learned that he didn't have to be rich or famous or achieve something important in order to be valued as a human being. That he could be rich or poor, and he would still be safe. He would be able to survive, feel secure in that survival, and feel love and belonging. It's the starkness of people coming from unimaginable helplessness and pain, and the awareness that the only thing that's gained them support is their power, is their dominance, is their money, is their social ranking, that makes the most abused children the hungriest for that power, which is often a miserable journey to get, by the way. I wouldn't want president to be on, you want your worst enemy to be president. It is a miserable job. You're going to be blamed for everything nobody wants to take responsibility for. You're going to be criticized and manipulate. Everything you're going to be said is going to be exaggerated and taken out of context. Nobody will stand by you if you meant well but didn't make the party look good. The party isn't voting for you because they like you or care about you or believe you can do good for the country. They're voting for you because they believe you will get them elected and they'll maintain their power. So we hate Trump, we'd never serve with Trump. Well, he seems to be able to get elected, so we love Trump. It's as simple as that. You see, and Trump's known that since he was a little boy. His dad wasn't particularly nice. His dad wasn't particularly handsome. His dad wasn't particularly honest or ethical. He was just very good at making a lot of money. And that's enough in a culture such as ours. It's enough. School not only doesn't prepare us for a meaningful life as a human being, it robs us of the time that we need to prepare ourselves. I didn't just leave school because 20% of what I was learning was relevant and it was being taught 40% efficiently. I left school because I had no time to learn about business. I had no time to learn about sales. And I was smart enough with 2 adult children who were completely irresponsible to know that if I didn't figure out how to take care of myself, certainly no one else was going to help me. And I'd be used as a pawn in my parents' manipulative barrages for money and for dependence. They were very happy to keep you dependent as long as, you had to earn your keep by punching the other side. If you didn't play that, well, then you're out on your ear. So if I actually wanted to be able to grow, I'd have to study things I didn't have time to study in school. And then I have to learn that by age 18 on my own. Now, to take us into a moment, as I say, my parents were unregulated, and so when I began to withdraw from the family system, both my mother and my father decided they were going to start hitting me as a teenager to get me to do what made them feel more comfortable. So I'm bigger than my mother. So I told my mother, I will do back to your body what you do to my body at a similar intensity. I'm not going to kill you, which I could, because I'm bigger than you. But, I will presume that if your body is capable of slapping me this hard, that it's also capable of receiving a slap that hard without dying. So just know that's the boundary here. Because I know you're not going to stop hitting me because I don't want it, because it's damaging, because it's traumatic. No, I understand that. But I think you'll stop hitting me if I hit you back at the same intensity. Well, this didn't feel very nice, did it? So she hit me, and I hit her. What? You hit your mother? It's terrible. Same thing with my father. You can manipulate and dominate and terrorize outside of the family and all that. Who knows why you've been given the care of 5 young children, but fine, that's your role in this culture. You go and abuse my siblings. You're not coming in my room. That's it. I'm not going to do anything to provoke you. I'm not going to antagonize you, but you're not coming in here. So, of course, that's immediately the thing he has to cross, because I'm getting back to this thing around suicide. How does someone become suicidal? So my father takes a step forward. He's going to come into my room. I say, one more step, and I'm going to punch you. Takes the step. I punch him. Very light punch. It's one of the few seconds in my life that I've been physically violent. It's less than 120 seconds since I was 10. Oh, my goodness. How dare you? I'm calling the police. So my father, of course, calls the police on his children. The police have, of course, never been interested in any of the physical, sexual, or psychological abuse happening in my house. Now, why on earth would we possibly think that 2 abused adult children would ever hurt their children? It's only been happening for hundreds of years, but we won't go there. So why would we assume that? So no, we're not going to ever come to protect the children. But wow, parents being abused by their children, we've got to do something about that. And so I have this recording of a long conversation with a rather pleasant. I mean, this is what's so ironic to me, looking back at this. If you look carefully, I'm in the top, 7% of lucky people by many outer metrics. My parents experienced probably 10 times more abuse than I experienced by outer metrics. There are tons of people in this country that have survived 10 to 100 times worse than what I'm dealing with. And part of the puzzle for me is making sense of why 3 of my siblings periodically want to kill ourselves. And what's that about? And how is it that that's coming up when we've been told how wonderfully lucky we are constantly since birth, and none of this has ever been ignored? How is that? And that's partly why I think this is such an important topic to explore if you want to actually be a citizen of your own psyche, of your own culture, as opposed to just spouting the dogma, keeping our heads in the sand. Well, the police officer seems most concerned in the fact that I'm not at formal school. I'm doing my own homeschooling, which my father is bitter about. He's like, stays in his room, who knows what he's doing, Of course he doesn't know what I'm doing. He doesn't talk. Now, I explain that, I'm studying things that are useful. And the police officer says, oh, this is very bad. She says, the economy is tough. Many people can't get a job. If you don't get your GED, nobody's going to hire you. And there's, of course, the roundabout thing where, I explained to the police officer, I will not hit my parents if they don't hit me. And she keeps saying, well, nobody should be hitting each other. And I said, I agree. And do you understand that if nobody hits each other, meaning if I'm taking a responsive position of matching force, my parents have to initiate violence to consider me a threat. Do you understand that? And she's saying, but nobody should be hitting each other. I said, I agree. So if you can get my parents to stop hitting me, and preferably my other siblings as well, violence vanishes from this house. Well, she's not very happy about that, but it's obviously logical. But she's really concerned that I'm never going to be able to get a job. And I said, it's possible. But I'm studying business. I'm studying more useful things in my homeschooling than any classmate I know. And that means that the person hiring me is going to have to make a decision. He's going to have someone on his hands who knows more useful topics, who's self-motivated, and who's learned deeper, very practical related stuff. He's going to have someone on his hands like that on the one hand. And on the other hand, he's going to have someone with a bit of paper. And he or she is going to have to decide, do I want a competent person without a bit of paper, or do I want someone with a piece of paper who's been studying algebra and US versions of social history and, trigonometry and geometry and all that. And I said, the person who prefers the bit of paper in that choice scenario is not someone intelligent enough to be worked for. I refuse to work for someone that dumb. Because if I was hiring someone, I'd give a shit about the piece of paper, and I'd want to know, can they do the job and do it well? I'm not going to ever work for someone who's dumber than me. Well, this completely went over the head of the policewoman. This is the level of intelligence that we are saddling our children with. Because I believe that any infant, given the opportunity to learn and grow in the ways that I've either been given or given myself, has very good odds of thinking for themselves, seeing clearly, and learning more useful topics. So the question comes to you as a parent, will you give your child that opportunity? Or are you going to smother them in the stupidity of our institutionalized education system that seems committed to teaching them useless topics inefficiently and leaving them unprepared for life? And the reason I take issue with parents around this is, while I've had dozens of parents tell me, I wish my kid was like you. I wish my kid was thinking and studying. If you want a pancake and you're eating spaghetti, you've got to change the ingredients. Meaning, I'm not coming out of nowhere. If you want an intelligent, motivated child studying useful things, you have to reward and support your child's intelligence. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to mix eggs, milk, flour, salt in a bowl, but you want your child to be a pancake, you're an idiot. There has never been a single parent who, even if they grasp this mentally, wants to continue the conversation or wants to empower their child to have a 10-fold higher level of learning. And I consider that a profound betrayal of the trust placed in the parent to put the child's interest first.